My mother absolutely loved watching the ospreys. She was supposed to move to Bozeman with us, but passed away too soon. We are now here, and I think she would really appreciate spending a small amount of her ashes at Dunrovin near the osprey so she could continue to watch them. I mean, that tells you how profoundly connected they are.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications. Hey folks, welcome back and thanks for tuning in this week. This week's guest and her story are so amazing. SuzAnne Miller is an unlikely tech entrepreneur who inadvertently built a social media platform, and it's really changing people's lives. SuzAnne and her family live down in the Bitterroot Valley and own Dunrovin Ranch. A few years back, they installed a wildlife camera near an osprey nest on their property and began a live stream. Well, folks started tuning in, a lot of folks. And now she's launched Days at Dunrovin, an emerging online community with enormous possibility. She calls it a cyber front porch, and I'm excited for you to learn all about it right now. Okay, so we're here today with SuzAnne Miller. SuzAnne, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. This is very pleasurable. Thank you.
Yeah, so I heard about your venture, and we'll talk all about it today, Dunrovin, Days at Dunrovin, and all of that, from so many people around town just saying, you got to meet this SuzAnne Miller. And I had the chance to go down and visit your ranch a couple of months ago, I guess, and meet you. And
your family?
Yeah, brought the family and kids. We had a fantastic time, and you had a long path to get to where you are now, but just give us a sense of like what is Dunrovin Ranch and what is Days at Dunrovin? What are you kind of working on right now?
Well, it's a long story.
It is a long story.
It is a long story. Yeah. Well, I'm a biometrician, and I've had a 35-year career working for natural resource management.
So I got to interrupt. Like, what's a biometrician?
Yes,
you got to let people know what that is.
Mathematics is applied to biological problems. So I did a lot of research in wildlife management and natural resource management. I worked in Chile and in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
As a child, I grew up in Butte, Montana, and my great-grandmother had a cabin south of Great Falls in the Great Belt Mountains, and when she built that cabin, she had returned to Montana after being away for a while.
Okay.
And she called that cabin Dunrovin. And I played in that cabin as a child, and it always stuck with me. I had a wonderful life there with my family.
Mm-hmm.
So when I returned to Montana in 1998, I believe, I bought a piece of property along the Bitterroot River, and I stuck up a sign and called it Dunrovin because I, too, felt that I was Dunrovin. And I had no intentions of opening a guest ranch, much less a cyber business. But one thing led to another. My husband has a large family, and we started having family reunions, and I started buying horses because I'm horse crazy. And suddenly,
is that a clinical
diagnosis? It is a diagnosis.
Yeah.
I mean, you either are or you're not. And if you are, no amount of pain or expense is going to keep you away. That's right. And ask any horsewoman that, and she'll tell you the same. At any rate, I started gathering horses and building apartments because my family was so large.
Sure.
We had family reunions there. So suddenly I found myself with a small guest ranch, and I opened a guest ranch and called it, of course, Dunrovin. My emphasis was on high-quality horseback riding in the backcountry, and I intermixed natural resource history because of my background.
Sure, and you're in such a beautiful spot to do that, right up against the Bitterroot River.
Yes.
It's so beautiful.
It is, and it's so close.
Mm-hmm.
It's just right outside of Lolo. It's small, but we're next to a big piece of state land, and I have the recreation use permit there. So our horseback rides go right from the ranch across the Bitterroot River and up into the sapphires, and I mean, they're really beautiful.
Yeah.
And then in 2011, the University of Montana approached us about putting a web camera above our osprey's nest. We had an osprey's nest that was actually on an electrical pole at the time.
Right.
And so they asked if we would put a web camera up, and of course we said, absolutely, we would love that. We're both biologists. My husband is a wildlife biologist.
Mm-hmm.
He specialized in bear management and bear research.
Okay.
And so we put this web camera above the osprey's nest, and I really didn't think of it in terms of other than any kind of terms other than scientific. And the first year, I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. It was kind of crude, and we didn't have access to operate it. It was kind of a beginning. But by 2012, it was really a powerful tool, and we had some 800,000 people watching it. And at the end of that...
Hold up, 800,000 people.
Yeah.
I mean, let's let that sink in for a moment.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of people.
Individuals.
Yeah.
I mean, and they watched for, 50 minutes at a time. It was compelling to watch very intimately this group of osprey raising their young. We called them Ozzie and Harriet,
Sure.
how
That's
original,
a little on the
right?
nose, but it works.
Right. At any rate, at the end of the 2012 season, when I went to turn the camera off because the birds had flown away, I got scores of emails and even phone calls and letters saying, please don't turn off your camera. We love watching your ranch.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And my first reaction was, well, get a life. I did not understand this.
Hopefully that wasn't in your auto reply.
No, it was not in my auto reply.
That's good.
Yeah. I mean, I left it on.
Yeah.
And just left it on.
Sure.
Without thinking of it at all. And then I became gravely ill. I had a complete blockage of my digestive tract and ended up with 3 major surgeries in 4 months.
Okay.
And I had about a 7-month recovery period that I was homebound. And, you can only watch so many episodes of Breaking Bad before you go crazy.
Yeah.
So I started watching my own web camera.
Okay.
And I started tweeting with other people. And suddenly I got it. I realized that if you are isolated and home alone, it's way more fun to watch something and communicate with other people than it is to watch in isolation.
And maybe something live, place-based, but live and unfolding in the moment for all of you at the same time.
There's an immediacy about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my research background kicked in, and I formed a focus group. I had 38 people from England to Hawaii in my focus group, and I took about 7 months of, survey monkeys and emails and a correspondence among all of us to figure out what it was people were interested in.
Yeah, trying to understand why these 800,000 people are tuning in.
Right. And what I found was nothing new. In fact, it was a validation of ancient truths about humanity.
Okay.
People are people watchers. They love nature. They're animal watchers. They love reality. And there is that sense of immediacy about watching something, as we just said, that is unrolling. No, it's unpredictable.
Right.
No one's in charge. And they loved conversing. They're very social. And so I then asked them, well, would you be willing to pay if I created a website that eliminated advertising, and the pay gate would kind of serve as a gate against trolls and bullies? And they said, yes, we would. And so I set on a path to create this.
Here we go.
Here we go. And it has consumed me for about 6 years. Wow. It's been amazing. I've had innumerable technical problems, as you might imagine.
Well, you got cameras, like outdoors, all of this. I mean, it's and broadband internet infrastructure problems too. Connection speed's been a challenge.
All the way along.
Yeah.
I added a web camera that exceeded my bandwidth, so then I had to go shopping for bandwidth, and that was a long, long struggle.
I'm sure.
It was. I ended up working with Centrix, a lovely company here in Missoula. They installed special equipment on the Lola water tower, so just for me. So
wow.
Yeah, and because I'm an uploader, not a downloader, and so there's a difference there.
Yeah.
And I've got, I didn't even know what encoders and all this were, but I'm now at least verbally familiar with them.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, SuzAnne, and at the risk of being perceived as potentially ageist, you do not fit the profile of the average kind of digital entrepreneur, if you will. Is that a fair assessment?
Boy, that is really fair.
Okay.
I just turned 71.
Okay.
Okay. And yeah, people would look at me and roll their eyes.
Roll your eyes
and
too,
make
maybe.
me roll my eyes too. Absolutely, I don't fit the profile. But I have found a really congenial group of people locally who have been more than willing to help me. I mean, I could name several of them, but there's a guy in the Bitterroot Valley, a guy named Ken Crepia, who really knew what he was doing technically and helped me immeasurably. And I had a young guy named Mackenzie Cole, and then my now business partner, James Walsham. All of them have been really instrumental on the technical side.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I've also had a difficult website. I mean, chat rooms and
Yeah, there's a lot to
posting and broadcasting. So, yeah, it's been a huge technical challenge. And because of that, I've kind of been in beta test for a long time.
Yeah.
But the advantage of all of this in being in beta test is that while the tech guys were trying to figure out my technology, I was figuring out programming.
Okay. What works, what doesn't, content? Yeah.
Yes.
Where to put the cameras, I'm sure.
Yes. But more importantly for me was how to engage, not just watch, but engage. And so I took to outlandish experiments that some of which turned out really well, and I now implement. For example, I turned to cell phones so people could keep track of me as I rode my horse across the river and up the mountain. So I would wear a Bluetooth phone around my neck, and I'd be talking to somebody in North Carolina.
Wow.
And everybody would be seeing me and hearing me while I rode my horse across the river and up the mountain.
Okay, so this conversation is being uploaded onto your website, and people can...
and melded with the visual.
Okay, so you're wearing some sort of a cam?
No, I'm not wearing a cam at all. My cameras are in the sky.
Okay.
They're pan, tilt, zoom, high definition web cameras, so they can zoom right in and they can follow me. Now there are places where I disappear into the forest.
That's part of the mystery.
But that's part of the mystery. They can hear my horse cross the river, clop, 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 splash, splash, splash. They can hear me talking about it. I can say, "Oh, the water's pretty deep here. I got to pick my feet up."
Mm-hmm.
And so. Unlike moving an avatar on a screen, people are moving a person. They're saying, well, go over here. We'd like to see you over here. So I go over there.
Sure.
So these are the kinds of things that I started doing. And I also looked at ways in which I could broadcast their interests and who they were. So I did things like our program called Fur and Feathers. And what we do is we ask a volunteer to send in photos of their dogs and cats and fish and horses and cows and goats and whatever animals they've shared parts of their life with.
Sure.
And we broadcast the pictures while I'm talking on the phone and interviewing them much like you are me right now.
Okay.
And so I ask them about their pets and the pet's personality. Well, what this does is it builds a real strong sense of community. Mm-hmm. People really get to know each other. You know, they get to know their children and their pets and all of that. And what I've come to find out is that they're having all this happen within the confines of Dunrovin has created a place on the internet, a place that people really identify with. And I liken my social engagement platform, and I don't call it a social media platform, because this is two-way. This is not us talking to them.
Right.
It's two-way. My social engagement platform is really a portal where they come and sit on my front porch. Mm-hmm. And my ranch is basically the neighborhood. And I have found through experiments and through talking with them and surveys that I've done with them that it's very much like a neighborhood in that it's knowable, it's mappable in your mind. They know where the river is in relation to the barn, in relation to the mountains. They feel comfortable there because they do know it. It becomes, part of their own environment. Mm-hmm. And they become bonded to it. And the more bonded they become to the place, the more comfortable they feel, and the more they open up to one another and to us. And so much so that, of course, people have come and visit. They just show up in my driveway.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean...
all hours of the day, probably.
Well, I had one couple who's come back now 4 or 5 years from Oklahoma. I mean, they drive over 1,000 miles just to spend a couple nights here and then go back. And when things happen, sad things like a horse dies. We had a horse die this last year, one that everybody knew. It was the grandmother of a foal that they had seen born.
Okay.
Really bonded to this
Yeah.
horse. So that when it died, they gathered up money and sent me a gift certificate for a tree, so I could plant the tree and they could watch it grow. So they're making my place their place.
Sure.
That's their tree.
Yeah, investment.
And again, like a neighborhood, a neighborhood is a place that you can leave your mark on. You can paint your fence. You can paint your house. And that's what they're doing to Dunrovin, is they are making it their own by sending things and asking me to do things. And
And you've done some sort of crowdsourced events too. Was it the naming of one of the horses that was born on the ranch?
Yes, absolutely. And every year we ask our members to name the osprey chicks that are hatched. And this brings our Missoula community to this larger community. Last year, for example, we every year do a project with schools, so the kids are involved in a science project around the osprey. And so I asked our members online, I said, what should we name the chicks? And they said, well, let's ask the school kids. So I asked the school kids, a class here at St. Joseph's in Missoula, and they suggested the names after a child who was a refugee child who had come from the Congo. So last year's chicks were named Wakati, Congo, and Jumbo. And so suddenly you've got people all over the United States understanding that Missoula is welcoming to refugees, that they're in our schools.
Yeah, it sends an important signal.
It does. And it makes them understand who we are. And likewise, Wakati started talking with people from Oklahoma and from Ontario and New York City. And,
Sure.
Yeah. So it brings people together in some really odd ways.
Well, and along those lines, one thing that you and I have talked about, and you mentioned this before, like not employing an advertising model.
Yeah.
You're able to, one, you have a membership model, so your members are paying a fee to have access to the feed and engage in the ways they do. And what comes with that, too, is you've been able to establish some norms, but also some policies for, hey, this is how we communicate in this neighborhood, if you will. And I think you have some strong thoughts about what's appropriate and what you want as far as decency in your community.
Absolutely, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because this slow maturation period that I've experienced has really helped me along that line as well. I think that cultural norms can be maintained easier than they can be established. And working with a small group to establish them is really beneficial. And I have one big word, and it's called respect. And, do unto others as you would want done unto yourself. And so we have that written right into our website, that when you sign up, you agree to these. And at first I monitored the chat and all of that, but I don't have to anymore. They monitor each other. And they're very constructive. We try to be gracious, be forgiving. Some people make mistakes. We don't want to just jump on people. But by and large, people are kind of blown away by how intimate they've become, because there is this expectation that you're going to be welcomed and you're going to be respected. And then I think the other issue is everybody on our side, and that means the Dunrovin side, who are kind of setting the tone and bringing guests and all of that. One of the things that we really strive to be is inclusive, and to make people understand that we're on the same level. We're their boots on the ground.
Sure.
We're not teachers. We're not the experts. We're just having fun with each other. And I jokingly tell people this is a whole bunch of seniors with high-tech toys and a playground. And that's kind of the way we approach this. We'll try anything.
Yeah, and so that identifies another very important piece of this is you have a wide variety of audience. I mean, you just referenced your engagement with the elementary school kids at St. Joe's, but what's emerged is that there's a community of seniors that are highly engaged in this content and this community you've built.
Exactly. Again, my research side always kicks in. And I not interviewed, but surveyed both my viewers and my members. Now, remember, I've had 800,000 viewers, and not all of them become members. And in fact, few of them have, and I've never done any marketing because of my technical problems. I wasn't sure I could supply
Yeah.
what I was promising.
Right.
And so I really wanted to stay with a small group who experimented with me. But both of those groups have been surveyed, and the typical watcher is a female between 60 and 80.
Okay.
They range all the way down to their 30s, up into their 80s and 90s. About 80% of them are female. Most of them are retired. Most of them live in their own home, either with their spouse or alone. About 13% of them live in group homes of some sort or another. But as I got to know who my audience was, I got to looking at that demographic. And of course, I'm squarely in the middle.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
I'm part of that demographic.
You are your customer in a
I am
way,
my
which is
customer.
something we say not to think in marketing, but in this case, I mean, you have a pretty good connection to your customer base.
I do. And little did I know that social isolation and loneliness are huge health factors among seniors.
Right.
Yeah, and I really wasn't aware of this because I have such an active life myself. I've been very lucky in that regard. But the one time that I was socially isolated, when I was
Right.
sick.
That's when you had your deepest engagement with the platform,
That's
right?
exactly right.
Yeah.
And then I really saw what it meant to be socially isolated. And it's a driving force for me. I really feel strong, very strongly about bringing this to, the population of people who are unable to get out of their homes for whatever reason, whether they're young and disabled or seniors. I mean, becoming a senior and as your body ages, you become more and more disabled for a variety of reasons. And this is clearly an important social environment for many of my followers. I mean, I've received incredible emails from people attesting to what it means to them in their lives. And you can look at the statistics. I mean, the background web statistics, they're on all day. They're on it every day, all day. And they check in with each other. We had a woman in British Columbia who disappeared from the chat, for example, and everybody got really worried. So one woman took it upon herself to call every hospital in Vancouver, British Columbia. They found her. They raised money, sent her flowers, sent her cards.
Wow. So they found her. She was not well.
She was
and
not well.
hospitalized?
She was in the hospital. They take care of each other. They
Yeah.
care about each other deeply.
A New Angle is underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
Hey, this is Colter Nuanez from ESPN Missoula, and you're listening to A New Angle.
It blows you away when you think about it. Let me tell you another short story. We had one woman who died, and she was one of our most kind of a leader in the bird world. She was
Okay.
a birder in Central Park, Manhattan. And she gave a lot of information out about birds. Everybody loved talking with her. Well, when she died, her niece called me and told me that she had died and said, I know how important Dunrovin was to my aunt, and I wanted you to know that she died. So I said, well, where is the memorial service? And she said, well, the Rutgers Presbyterian Church in Manhattan. So I called them and I said, do you live stream? And they said yes. So we live streamed her funeral, and another one of our members took the train up from New Jersey and spoke on our behalf.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, that you just don't find that online communities.
No.
That level of commitment.
And I think you're speaking to something that is really needed and valued in this community of seniors that you've identified.
I think so. And this was what drives me on to make this a really viable business.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a really chronic, widespread problem, social isolation among seniors, and it's going to get worse.
Oh, absolutely. And then all the data about depression
Yep.
And dementia and all these things are just so staggering that things like this, I think, could move the needle on healthcare outcomes at a very low cost relative to other things that we're doing right now.
Oh, I agree. And in fact, one of the people here at the University of Montana in the social work department, Dr. Keith Anderson, who is a gerontologist, did a preliminary review and just published a paper about Days at Dunrovin. And that's exactly what he said, was that it was a cost-effective way to address these issues at the individual, family, and the institutional levels. I mean, more research has to be done to quantify it. But, based on the surveys that I have done with my own clients, and then based on the testimonials that I get daily, just daily. Before you and I started, I read one to you.
Yeah, we'll have to read that at some point in the conversation. Go ahead right now. This is an email you received from a member of your community.
Just yesterday. My mother absolutely loved watching the ospreys. She was supposed to move to Bozeman with us, but passed away too soon. We are now here, and I think she would really appreciate spending a small amount of her ashes at Dunrovin near the osprey so she could continue to watch them. I mean, that tells you how profoundly connected they are. And I see why. I've become one of my own viewers, and you can't help but, when you watch these animals and you watch them struggle with life, you become very bonded, even though you know you're never going to touch this animal. It's not a two-way street by any means.
Yeah.
They don't know we exist. And yet there's a real unfolding of life. There's a circle of life there to watch these birds care for their young, or to watch my horses care for their young. It's just a circle of life.
So let's speak to some of the, because what you described there is really rich, multidimensional content. And so we kind of didn't speak about this directly earlier, but I want to just make sure listeners get that this is not just a single camera in an osprey nest anymore. I mean, that's how it accidentally started, but maybe give us the summary of the scope of the operations here.
We actually have 5 cameras now.
Okay.
All right. We have 4 that are permanently installed. One that's over the osprey's nest. And all of these can be, they're all called pan-tilt zoom, which means you can zoom in or you can go 360 degrees. We have one that's over our ranch, the corral area where the stalls are, so they watch the coming and goings of the animals. And then we've put one on what we call the bench, which is where the fields break over into the riparian forest. And this is a very important ecological zone, particularly for birds. Birds come out of the forest to seek resources in the fields. And so we've put some bird feeders there, and boy, they are incredibly active. And of course, they're messy. The birds are messy. So the deer come to pick up.
Sure.
And then the raccoons come to pick up. And then the coyotes come because the raccoons are there. And then the foxes come, and the squirrels are there. So this is a very lively camera where you can see all this wildlife coming and going.
For sure,
And then just recently we put a camera on the Bitterroot River. And let me tell you, this is really being fun. This is a lot of fun. We've watched the river freeze and thaw, and the birds adapt to the freezing river. We've got a whole new group of birds. There are wild horses across the river from us. There's a huge herd of wild elk that we often see. We see deer all the time coming and going. We had a fox family move in last spring, about a year ago, and they denned within sight of the cameras.
Oh gosh, that must have been a huge hit.
Oh, 6 foxes, 6 kits. And it just so happened that last year's osprey chicks were incredibly combative and fought over every fish, the older chicks. And we had fish falling out of the nest. So the foxes figured this out without any trouble at all. And so some of our viewers man the cameras, and they get up way before I do. I mean, the people on the East Coast. And even before daylight, they were watching the foxes come to the osprey's nest and wait for fish to fall out of the osprey's nest. It It was crazy. And then we had a cougar come and
Okay.
steal one of the foxes.
Oh, my.
Yeah, so people they were delighted to see the cougar, but they were unhappy that the fox was
Well,
the...
that's nature, I suppose,
That's
right?
nature. And then, of course, we punctuate all of this with programs.
Right. Okay. So speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and it started with a book club that I created in collaboration with the head of the creative writing program here at the University of Montana, Judy Blunt. We read her book first, and then she came out very graciously and discussed the book with us. And ever since then, she chooses 4 books a year, and it's kind of a crazy thing, but it's really fun. We have chat sessions twice while reading the book. And during those chat sessions, we create a discussion guide. And then Judy connects us with the author.
Sure.
And either the author comes out to my house and we live stream, or we bring them in via Skype or whatever. And so the people get to ask the author questions about their book. And most of the time we have the author, but sometimes we can't get them, in which case Judy finds somebody who's an expert in the field, or she's just been an incredible resource to do this. And it was so successful, people just loved doing this, that I branched out. And, I attend the Molly classes here at the University of Montana. They're just way fun for older folks. And some of them have really sparked my interest, so I have conned a couple of the instructors into working with me. And so Larry Manch from the Montana Innocence Project, he's both a historian and an attorney, is doing a series on Great American Criminal Trials. And it's really fun. You do a deep dive in history around a particular trial. And what's fun is that everybody comes at this from a different perspective, and we kind of follow the same book club format where we look at things and we have some required readings and we watch some videos together, and then we ask a bunch of questions. And it's just a really fun way to learn. And I've done, some things like I've had a photographer teach a younger photographer photography online. So I know that sounds insane, but
it's like some sort of an Escher print, I'm imagining in my head right here.
Yes. But what happens is he gives the student an assignment, and then the student comes back and everybody sees the photos and he critiques the photos. And people really enjoyed that because they could start discerning different aspects of photos. And
this is all happening within your community that, the first reason for it to come together were these cameras, yet now that you built the community, you can introduce all forms of other content.
Absolutely. We've even done, I had a guy out there who was a yoga instructor, and he wanted to build a yoga Soheim hill. You're looking at me quizzically.
Yeah, well, I don't know what that is.
I didn't either.
Yeah, sure, I guess. What is that?
What is that? I said, so it's a hole in the ground that you plant green in, and when you get down in the hole, you can see a sky in green. Okay?
Okay.
All right? And he would never tell me when he was showing up, and he built it with a coffee can. He was an art student here. And so I told my followers, I said, well, let's have Boo sightings. His name was Boo. Tell me when he comes.
Okay.
And then I found out he was a yoga instructor, and I said, so, well, let's do a trade here. You can do senior yoga with me.
Of course, yeah.
In the orchard.
Right.
7 o'clock in the morning, I'd get up, go out to the orchard, and he'd do yoga. And I had people all over the United States doing yoga with me. And then, of course, the automatic sprinklers would go on. Or a horse would run through.
Sure. Yeah. Live content. That's what it's about.
Live content, and people are all just laughing like crazy.
Yeah, and so as you lay out this, your growth in terms of the number of cameras and the scope of the operation and the size of the community, and you mentioned before you're an uploader, and the infrastructure piece has been a challenge, not just to find a service provider, but also dealing with municipalities, dealing with local government, trying to kind of get the right permitting and all that stuff has been another piece of the puzzle for you to work on as well, right?
It has been, and those of many of you know that within Missoula County, I had my go-around with county
Yeah.
government. Yeah, they tried to close me down twice and went to court, and that was very
And
stressful.
just give us the summary there. Like, what was the basis of the attempt to shut you down?
Well, there was a deputy county attorney here in Missoula County who interpreted Montana's subdivision laws in a very peculiar way.
Okay.
And it really said that if you had any separation on your property, like another building, that you could lease or rent, that you had to undergo subdivision.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's a very onerous process. And in fact,
It would seem like almost any ranch would sort of apply. Yeah, that would apply to any ranch sort of structure.
Exactly. And there was only 2 counties in all of Montana that interpreted the law this way.
Yeah.
But we got afoul of that. And it took us 3 years to undo what this deputy county attorney was trying to foist on us. Went to court twice. And finally, the judge said, listen, it's Missoula County that's wrong, not the Millers. And, they said, you've been harassing these poor people.
Yeah.
And so we were completely vindicated. But boy, I'll tell you, it was a real struggle. All the time I'm trying to build this business, I'm also fighting off the county.
Yeah, you don't need that.
I did not need that. No, but I feel very good about how it all came out in the end. We did go to the legislature and clarify the law.
Yeah.
We went all the way to the legislature, and our bills, my husband did this. I really need to thank him for all the work that he did. Passed I think 100 to nothing in the House and 49 to 3 or something. I don't know. No.
That seems good.
Oh yeah, it was overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and we've talked about this before. Like, you've worked in your career in a variety of seats. You've worked in the public sector, private sector. You've had a university affiliation. Talk a little bit about trying to navigate the world where these institutions or these forces could work against each other or work in tandem with one another, and maybe how we can make things better here.
Well, that's a really interesting question, and it's a really interesting dilemma in my mind. And I have found, becoming a businesswoman late in life, that the social nonprofit world is very suspect of the business world, as is the academic world outside the business schools. So in my own endeavors, I've come up with considerable resistance. And I think it's really counterproductive for all of us. For example, the reason I'm trying to promote my business is the social benefit. That's what hooked me. That's what made me strive forward. But I also recognize there's a big financial benefit to be had.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very lucrative field, a lucrative market. But when you talk to the business commercial side, they seem to be overly interested in the financial side.
Yeah.
And when you talk to the nonprofit side, they're overly interested in the social benefit side, not recognizing the market forces that would compel somebody like me to make this a business as opposed to a nonprofit.
Right.
And then you get government on both sides that sometimes serve neither very well. And from my own perspective, it's the 3 stools for our culture and for our civilization. You've got government and then the economic activity and the social, cultural activity. And I just, on a personal level, I've never really understood so fundamentally how they don't get along, how they don't meld together, and they're not pieces of a puzzle that fit nicely together. And I think there's been some very recent acknowledgement of those facts. What I'm trying to do is create a benefit corporation.
Right.
And that is something that's new to Montana law in 2015. And that allows you to take away from the financial gains, from your fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, to address social and environmental aspects. And that, to me, is the answer, is to have, entities that recognize all of these parts of the puzzle. Government oftentimes represents the environmental because through regulation, and nonprofits represent the social through their mission statements and their goals, and business the economic, commercial. And I just think it's counterproductive to not have those three entities more in mesh and sync with each other. And I really saw this when I went to California last year to try to raise money for this endeavor, for my Days at Dunrovin business. I accidentally had a moment to speak at a breakout session with venture capitalists. And I explained, I said, I'm a 71-year-old woman at the end of the road, at the end of the internet grid, who has inadvertently created this great thing.
Yeah.
And they were very impressed when I told them I had 2 million YouTube viewers, right? Every one of them came up to me after and said, don't let venture capital near you. It'll ruin you.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
They said that. Too
The
much.
venture capitalists.
The venture
told
capitalists
you that.
told me that. And it's too much emphasis on what they called pump and dump. Build a company.
Yeah, build a return fast, spin it off.
Spin it off.
Yeah.
And that does not satisfy my social goals.
Yeah.
And yet when I talk with people who are more socially minded, they say I should be a nonprofit altogether.
Yeah.
And I just sort of scratch my head and think, gosh, these two worlds need to come together.
Yeah, and that benefit corporation designation maybe is a start. I know that many companies have used that in creating structures where there's pathways to that type of partnership, at least is a start. It makes me also think about, you referenced your slow growth model, and you've had time to experiment, time to build slowly. But along with that, that's a lot of time where you foot the bill for a lot of this development, investment, et cetera. So where are you at now with your process and trying to make this more of a viable business and support kind of the type of technology that you need to build the community you want to build online?
Well, I am looking for investors. Yeah. That's exactly that is the point that I am at now. And very luckily, I'm working with the University of Montana, Blackstone Launchpad. They're very helpful to me. And I hope to get in front of some investors. I've also started some pilot projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, which are really fun and are helping me a great deal. Really craft this in a way that companies who provide both in-home care and in-residence care can utilize this to help foment community both within residential communities and within the clients that are served by in-home health care.
Can you tell us kind of what these pilots would look like? I mean, you don't have to, I know you got client confidentiality or whatever,
right.
But like what kind of things are you experimenting with?
Well, most of the programs that I have developed in the past 6 years have been focused on individuals with individual computers in their own home. And now I'm working with senior companies, many of whom have residents that have no computer facility whatsoever. So I'm looking towards group activities as opposed to individual activities. And I'm learning to successfully navigate that. And the groups that I'm working with, one group has said, their attendance at group things has gone way up because of this.
Yeah.
And they've actually had relatives of some of their residents call and say, Aunt Jane is talking about horses and birds. Is everything okay over there?
Yeah, what's the story with these osprey?
Yeah, so and we want to bring the families into this as well. So I'm learning how to package this in a way that can really support the enrichment coordinators that work with these companies and to, bring their caregivers and their clients in the fold.
Sure.
So this is where I'm at right now.
So you're out there letting people know.
Yep.
Trying new things.
Yep.
I mean, it's so inspiring, SuzAnne, to see what you're doing, but also you're just zest for learning, trying new things, and building a community that has that social benefit to so many people.
Well, I have to tell you, it's not without angst.
Oh, I'm sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things I've loved about all of this is it's brought me into contact with other entrepreneurs. And I realize I'm not alone in my angst. That part of the entrepreneurial journey is not knowing, what's going to come around the corner, how much to put into it, and when to say this is not going to work. So there's, it's not without its dilemmas for sure. But I have found that it is keeping me young at heart, and I love the interactions I have with both my online community and the community here, the local community, people like you, people like the 1 Million Cups group. They've all been supportive, and I would not have come into contact with all these wonderful young people had I not been pushing myself down this path.
So tell us how people can learn more, experience the product, so to speak, experience the community, Days of Dunrovin. How do people find you?
Well, thank you for asking. www.days@Dunrovin, and Dunrovin is spelled DUNROV as in Victor, IN. So it's days@Dunrovin.com. We do have one of our cameras operating on the home page that can be viewed anytime, free of charge, no advertising. But to gain access to everything else, we charge $8 a month, $88 a year. And that gives you full access to all of our programs and all of our cameras, and eliminates the need for advertising and gates our community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I encourage everybody to check it out. It's an amazing site. It's an amazing ranch. Go visit if you can. Send SuzAnne an email, and I'm sure she'll show you around.
Absolutely.
And thanks. Thanks for doing what you're doing, and thanks for coming on the pod to tell us your story.
Well, thank you, Justin. I greatly appreciate it.
Okay, super cool and inspiring what SuzAnne is doing. I encourage you to check it out. Coming up next week, we've got University of Montana professors Sarah Rinfrey and Sam Panarella, along with former U.S. Senator and Ambassador to China Max Baucus. Tune in and learn all about what's cooking at the Baucus Center and how what they're doing with education and student experiences is truly distinct on a national scale. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, part of the Michelle and Lauren Hansen Media Lab at the University of Montana College of Business. Remember that this podcast was supported by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. These guys pretty much sell anything electrical you'd ever need, but they also hire a ton of our students. If you want to learn more about jobs at CED, visit cedcareers.com. Before we go, I want to thank some important peeps. Executive producer, Stefan Borsum. Producer, Aidan Morton. And interns, Aspen Runkle, Max Gibson, and Ellie Hanasek. Huge thanks to VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks for the tunes. And finally, props to Jeff Meese, our master of all things sound. Finally, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word, and be sure to use the hashtag #anewangle when you do. Thanks a lot. See you next time.